most ingrained memory of Dr. Martin Luther King was his death, because that was the first time I'd ever witnessed my father crying. He had a tremendous impact on my childhood from there, especially as we moved to the city of Gardena in 1969, just a year after his death, and we were the first black family on our street, and we remember, or I remember, those who welcomed us, but those who looked at us with great disdain.
I remember the March on Washington. I remember the throngs of people and all the excitement about what Dr. Martin Luther King meant. I also remember his death when I was in college, and how impacted that was in my life in terms of feeling such a deep hurt that someone had taken the life of Dr. King, and at the same time, all of us were committed to making sure that the dream would not die with Dr. King, that we had a commitment to make sure that that dream continued to live.
I think about stories that my father shared about his grandparents and racial injustice and inequality, 100 years ago, but those same issues are with us today.
My parents were overseas. They were in the Air Force. My father was, and he was stationed in France where I was born. They talked about the Voting Rights Act and what Dr. King helped to contribute to it and how it came about. And when it happened, they were so happy because growing up in the South, they didn't have the right to vote, and how it was so important that people died and fought for the right to vote, and how I should always vote and how important it was.
What I remember most of all growing up in Watts is that when you walk through the door of our family home, before you saw anything else, the TV, the furniture, you saw 3 pictures. And it was significant not only in my home, but it was represented in other people's homes. And that was a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, and Jesus. And when we came home, those are 3 pictures we saw. When we left the home, those are the 3 pictures we saw.
I'm too young to have any stories about Dr. King, but my grandmother attended the March on Washington. She wouldn't share stories that often about it, but when she did, it would get really quiet in the room with her because you knew that she was recalling something that was incredibly important to all of us, whether we had been there or not.
My uncles won the Little Rock Nine, the 9 kids integrated Central High School in 1957. I was always told about their struggles and the struggles of our people. But more important, my family told us about their relationship with Dr. Martin Luther King. And from that day, my family has been an integral part in the civil rights movement, and I've been someone who has to be a part of the civil rights movement because that is not only part of my legacy, but it's what I have to give back, and it's because of Martin Luther King.
My memory of Dr. King is more about my mother. A few weeks before he died, he spoke about his desire for her to be in Congress and what great possibilities she brought to the state of California. So on my desk, I keep the picture of my mother and Dr. King, and it reminds me every day of how lucky I am to get to walk on the green carpet, how important my being there is, not just to my community, but to my daughter, who hopefully, not unlike my mom was an assembly member, I am now on the carpet, and even in light of the climate today, what is possible for my child.
Dr. King came to Pasadena, Friendship Baptist Church, and I remember as a child the line stretching out the church and around the corner. My mom held my hand and my brother's, and she made it very clear to my aunt that she was going to make her way through the crowd and shake his hand. She made her way through, and she reached up and he looked down, and he reached out and he shook her hand, and you felt the power of his presence, but also the tenacity of my mom to make her way to this person who she was inspired by as well.
Right now, we stand on his shoulders, Dr. King and everyone that came before us, whether through the legislature or the Civil Rights Act, folks that were marched to fight for those rights. And just even the simple right to vote, the right to be a man, the right to ride a bus, to sit at a counter and eat your food. That's so important.
And I am never, ever at a moment forgetful of the fact that I'm a black woman. And I am never, ever forgetful of the fact that someone came before me and died so that I would have a right to find and use my courage.
I've always marveled at his ability to influence people with ideas and with the power of a good thought and a way to move humanity to another level.
His legacy is rich and it's inclusive. And it's a legacy that will continue to live on. If I can just help somebody along the way, then my living here would not be in vain.
I think about so many people in our country, in our state of California, that, you know, but for Dr. King and people in his generation, we wouldn't have the same opportunities. And granted, there's a long way to go. You see the racial inequality and injustice every day here in our great state, from employment to the prison systems to our schools. We have a long way to go.
We really need to remember that, because it's a lot of good people being silent on what is happening in America right now as it relates to race, as it relates to gender, as it relates to religion.
And I would never, ever, ever spoil the legacy of Dr. King by not standing up for civil rights and ensure that we stand up for other people.
I think of how hard it was for Dr. King and members of the civil rights movement. And so even though my journey may be hard, the things that I look at are difficult, but the reality is it's much easier than Dr. King, and that motivates me to realize that I'm just really doing something small in comparison to what he did, and I should have the courage to do that.
I am also constantly reminded that the dream, it was not just for me. It was not just for an African-American little girl. It is for all of us, and that we are all better when we work together. And that, I believe, was truly the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King.